Hi, I'm Jared Smith.
And I'm Noelle Bellows.
I'm Kim.
And I'm Craig Martineau.
And I'm Andrew Lyman. So, before we get started, we're going to have an experiment, but first I need everybody to make paper airplanes. So, this is going to be really fun. You can make whatever you want. I'm going to hand out papers to everybody. You can make whatever type of paper airplane you want, but I did a ton of research and I found a really cool airplane that I'm going to teach you guys how to make. Number one, so get your paper. You want to pull the top right-hand corner to a right-hand angle, okay? So it's going to make a 90-degree angle with that corner. You're going to do the exact same thing to the left side. It's going to make it look like this, or that. The next, everybody following along? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Next is you're going to fold this part down, okay? And then you're going to fold it along. It's going to make somewhat of a square color, or a square shape. It's going to look like this. The next part is you're going to fold in the corner. Now you're not going to fold it all the way to a right-hand angle again, but it's going to be pretty close. Let me know once everybody's got that down. And I'll show you what it looks like on mine. So this is what it looks like on mine. Everybody got that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Next part is you're going to take this little tip down here and you're going to fold it up, okay? You're going to fold it up vertically so that it's facing the top. Keep it in the middle. It'll look like this. Now the next part is you're going to take it to its side and you're going to fold it right in half, okay? Just like that. It's gonna, sometimes it doesn't add up perfectly, but it's gonna be balanced, which is the most important part for the experiment. Okay, and then after that you just fold the wings down like this. And you fold them to however you like. I like them even with the bottom. So you do that, okay? Now, this is the finished product. This is, you guys should look generally somewhat like this. Okay. So, everybody ready for the experiment?
Yes.
Yes.
We actually just did it. So,
What?
yeah, mind blown, right? Okay, how many of you made this paper airplane?
I did.
Or similar to it? Okay. Most of the class ended up doing this. Only a couple people, it seems, did something else. So, we were actually expecting that. We were expecting most everybody, the majority of the class, to follow this. And that's because this is the only example that was provided to you. We only gave you this example.
So, our topic today is how media and advertising shape the perceived majority opinion. So, kind of the outline of what we're going to be talking about is first we'll talk kind of about how that happens, so how media and advertising persuade us. Then we'll kind of go into an example, historical example with Hitler, and then talk about some modern day persuasion. Okay, so how do media and advertising shape the majority opinion? A couple things. First, it kind of, well, most people want to join the bandwagon, as they say, so kind of things that are more popular or more liked or more shared or more viewed on different social media platforms, that's what becomes more popular, and it kind of is just a snowball effect. And that just comes from people wanting to feel like they're part of everybody else, I guess, or part of the big group. Another thing is that neutral opinions usually aren't shared, so it's usually extremes that get shared through both traditional media and on social media. And so that just doesn't allow neutral opinions to be raised or opposing opinions to different ideas. So that kind of affects how we're persuaded. An example, back in 2002, David Niven did an experiment where it had to do with the death penalty and people's opinions about the death penalty. And so what he did was he got 3 groups. The first group was given articles that were very much in support of the death penalty, very one-sided, an extreme view. The second group were given kind of neutral articles, so articles arguing both sides, and then the third group was the control group, so they didn't have any articles about the death penalty. And what he found was that the control group and the first group that read kind of the extreme articles, compared to the second group was more likely to have an unbiased opinion, or was more likely to not be persuaded to the one extreme. And so that kind of just showed that there is this sway when media portrays a one-sided argument that's kind of the extreme. It tends to pull people in that direction, whereas if people could get both sides, then they would not be as swayed, I guess, by media.
Two-step.
Oh, and then a couple other things. Media also usually takes advantage of the peripheral route, so that's kind of like we talked about earlier in class. Kind of not as much thought goes into that kind of decision making and opinion forming. And then the 2-step flow, which we'll talk about as well.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about some of the definitions that we're going to be using today as we talk about our example of Hitler and our social media in the modern day examples. So we've talked about in class what persuasion is, what credibility is, and then we've talked about the 6 persuasion principles. But we really wanted to highlight the 2-step flow because that's going to be a big part of what we talk about. So this is the idea that media fluids, it generally flows from these big people up top, they're the opinion leaders, and then it goes down to the rank and file. So opinion leaders can include talk show hosts like Oprah, editorial columnists, doctors, just the people that decide kind of what's sent out to the rest of us. And that means that media's influence can penetrate our culture in subtle ways. Sometimes we don't even notice that we're paying attention to an authority figure. And we're going to start talking about Hitler now.
Okay, so we'll begin in before 1928, and Hitler joined the Nazi Party. The Nazi Party was already in existence, but it was hardly known by anyone. But then, after 1928, with Hitler's charismatic personality and great public speaking abilities, the popularity of the Nazis skyrocketed, and inversely, the popularity of other parties went down, to the point where in 1933, the Nazis had gained control of the majority, or not the majority, but have become the most popular party, and Hitler was put into power at that time. Now, jump forward a year later, the New York Times reported that in 1934, Hitler had a 90% approval rating among Germans. To put this into perspective, Gallup reported that the highest approval rating during presidential office was John F. Kennedy as president, and he earned a 70.1 approval rating among Americans. And then the highest approval rating for an American president at a given point was George W. Bush. Right after he announced the War on Terror, it was a 92%. So 90% is very high, as we know. But how did he get to this point? Well, he used persuasion and advertising. And Hitler chose Joseph Goebbels as the Minister of Propaganda for the Nazi Party. And his idea was just to persuade the masses of his ideology. So we're going to watch a little video about how Hitler achieved this goal.
Gaining millions of supporters. Hitler, knowing the importance of children as supporters of the future, greatly supported these endeavors.
film and radio were also crucial to the Nazi objective of controlling public opinion. For the first time in history, these brand new technologies were being used for propaganda. Radio allowed the Nazis to control the news. Nazi propaganda, like all good propaganda, was usually based in truth, but gave only the information that would force the public to form a certain opinion. For instance, when Germany won a battle, the radio would glorify the victory, speaking of the bravery and strength of the German people. When a battle was lost, however, the radio broadcast would cease, leaving the public in the dark. Of all forms of propaganda used by the Nazi Party, film was perhaps the most effective. Between 1933 and 1945, 1,094 German feature films were created. What made Nazi film so successful was the fact that rather than blatantly preaching ideology to the public, it sought to entertain them, while glorifying the government at the same time. The public was unaware of the indoctrination present in the films, for they saw the movies as entertainment only. These films were meant to distract the public from the unpleasantness of war, while still elevating the government. One of the most famous examples was titled The Eternal Jew, a film in the form of a documentary that abused the Jews and gave a horrifying preview of the cruelty that would soon befall them. Another well-known film that promoted the strength of the Nazi Party was titled The Triumph of the Will, chronicling many of the powerful speeches given by Nazi leaders at the time. These two films, among many others, were vital to the goals of Nazi propaganda, effectively increasing general morale and support for the Nazis. The use of Nazi propaganda had major effects not only on Germany, but on the world. Before the war began, the rise of the Nazi Party succeeded in stabilizing the economy, lifting Germany from economic crisis. The Nazi Party also succeeded in gaining millions of supporters in a relatively short period of time, a feat accomplished only through the lies of propaganda.
Okay, so that video explained a little bit about the mediums, the radio and film that Hitler used to persuade the masses. And one of the techniques that Hitler used was this illusion of support. It was published in 2 newspapers that there was this support, an overwhelming support for Hitler. And the headlines in August of 1934, one of them read, "Hitler for Germany, all of Germany of Hitler." And then another one wrote, "Today Hitler is all of Germany." So, as this first one suggests, the reality for the truth of these headlines was severely lacking. And so it leads us to believe that maybe the support, the 90% approval rating for Hitler, may not have been so accurate. And then I'll just read this last quote here. "It was principally the middle class that abandoned democracy and turned to him in droves, driven by fear of another 1923 communist revolution and the desire for strong leadership. For many, democracy had shallow roots." However, it's important to remember that while many of the people went to Hitler, not all of them did. And so we're going to go to this last passage.
Oh yeah, so I just want to talk a little about this. We were in kind of some of the research, we found some interesting stuff about how there was a lot of support for Hitler, but those that did oppose Hitler or oppose kind of the Nazi Party, their efforts were kind of halted, and usually in violent ways, by the Gestapo and the security service. So kind of, it was mentioned in the video, and kind of like we talked about before, usually like the less popular opinions or the opinions that are more neutral are not known, and Hitler did that through kind of a more violent way of kind of hushing those opposing opinions. But don't forget that scissors did beat paper. Get it? Paper, scissors.
The next thing we're going to talk about is social media and controversial topics. So popular opinions get formed because they're liked and shared, and social media doesn't promote unpopular opinions, but it does take advantage of ambiguous ones. They like to really sway you to what they're believing on that end. So an example of that would be, based on what you see in media, what percentage of Americans do you think would be, back, the other one, would be gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender? The reality is only 3.8% of Americans are, but after President Obama tweeted #LoveWins, in the next 24 hours, 6.2 million tweets were shared with that same hashtag. And then based on that information, what percentage of Americans, what would you expect to be supportive of traditional marriage? In reality, 50 to 60% of Americans do. And another example is, based on what we see in media, what percentage of Americans would you expect to have the ideal body? Reality, only 4% of Americans do have that. Yeah, every magazine, every movie, every music video, everything we see in the media is filled with people who possess the ideal body, and that makes us all feel like that's how we're supposed to look. And then based on that, what percent do you think would be obese or overweight? Reality, in America, 74% of men and 64% of women are considered overweight or obese, yet media portrays overweight people with negative characters and stereotypes in television shows and in movies.
Okay, so an example in the modern day media of how they use their ability to persuade us was a study that looked at ambivalence towards a celebrity or an item to be sold. So these people in the study, they found that if they had an ambivalent attitude toward the celebrity endorser, they were easily persuaded by presenting some positive information about the celebrity, like, oh, they're really nice, they're really great, even though it might not relate to the product. Like, Channing Tatum's really attractive, but like, what does that have to do with Tatum Talk? Everything, I guess. And then on the other hand, they found that people that already had a specific opinion about the celebrity, either they liked them or they didn't like them, they weren't persuaded by information that was presented to them. They were able to hold their ground. And this is really relevant because, as you can see at the bottom, celebrity endorsers are in 25% of ads, and celebrity endorsers, the people that are doing these ads, they know that we can be